What's up, duelists? It's your boy. I'm back again with another installment in the Ultimate Guide series. It's been a little while, but this is basically a series where I cover a deck that's, a mainstay, a popular one in the Edison format. And today's video is going to be about zombie synchro decks. If you guys are new to the channel, if you guys are checking this out for the first time, if you're a newer player to Edison format, first things first, you got to know about Edison format. You got to be subscribed to my YouTube channel. That's the first step of playing Edison format. If you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can't play Edison format. So those are the rules. I don't make the rules. Make sure and hit subscribe if you're newer. Also, Edison format, it's the March 2010 Yu-Gi-Oh format, and this is kind of a series I do basically talking about some of the mainstay decks, and let's just get right into things. Today's deck is the Diva Zombies deck. Now, this is one of those decks that a lot of people kind of on the fence about moving into 2022. And in hindsight, realize that as the metagame develops more and more, this deck's actually really, really good. Probably A tier, S tier deck in the format. You have a lot of really powerful plays. Compared to the ban list right before it, March 2010 ban list had a lot of nerfs for this deck. So a lot of those powerful plays that you can make, you can only do them once. And so you kind of got to be careful about your positioning with this deck. It is a very skill-intensive combo deck, and I think it has a really good fair game too. Let's go ahead and get into some of the card choices in the stock lists. The formatting of these videos is like I do a stock list, I show some lists that have been successful, and then I show different options, and then I show the weaknesses of the deck, and that's pretty much the formula we're going to follow for this one. These videos take a little bit of time to make, so make sure you guys leave a comment, a like to show your support for this type of thing, and yeah. Okay, so First off, the most important zombie monster is not actually a zombie monster, it's actually a fiend. It's Caius the Shadow Monarch. This is probably one of the most important cards for the deck because it gives you your biggest power play. Your biggest power play is to tribute a Goblin Zombie, one of these guys, for Caius the Shadow Monarch. The way Goblin Zombie works is if he's sent from the field to the graveyard, mandatory, you must search a zombie monster with 1200 or less defense from your deck to your hand. He's like an archetypal Sangan, which you also play because these three cards are great tribute fodder for Caius the Shadow Monarch. And it gives you an automatic +1 on the summon because you lose a card, you banish a card, and you search a card. So you spend one card, you get two cards, and you get this really big body of Caius. And that's just the best part of this deck. You got to play the two Goblin Zombies. They also combo when you synchro with them. So if you synchro with a Plague Spreader Zombie or a Deep Sea Diva with a Goblin Zombie, you'll get a search, you make Bryonic, you search Mizuki. This is your bread and butter combo. Usually, with zombies, you want to get your opponent to about 5,100 life points. I say about 5,100, a little bit less works, a little bit more doesn't exactly work. Goblin Zombie on field. Imagine it. Imagine this little guy, he's on field. Summon Deep Sea Diva. Special summon the other Deep Sea Diva. You synchro with the first Deep Sea Diva and Goblin Zombie. You make Bryonic, Dragon of the Ice Barrier. You get the search from Goblin Zombie, you search Mizuki. You bounce a card with Bryonic on the field. Discard Mizuki. Mizuki banish, bring back Goblin Zombie. Synchro off with the Deep Sea Diva and the other Goblin Zombie. Make Yugioh Guardian. That's where the 5,100 comes in. 2,800 plus 2,300, big damage. And then you get another search with the Goblin Zombie. So Goblin Zombie plus Deep Sea Diva is a really powerful +1 combo that ends you with two Synchro monsters and a bounce. This deck has potential to kill you out of nowhere because of this. If they have any extenders like Burial from the Different Dimension, Return, Book of Life, Call the Haunted, any of these types of things, the deck can easily deal 8,000 in one turn. The issue is they can only go for this play once, so you got to be careful when you do it. Don't just bust your fucking nut into like 7 back row or whatever. And yeah, I mean that's pretty much the standard approach to this deck. You can use a lot of your other, more resilient cards, not less resilient, more resilient cards to kind of play through the back row. Early on, you can use Trigodia while he's still large, while you still have a handful of cards to pressure your opponent, maybe force out some back row. You can use the Pyramid Turtles to keep up your board presence, keep up your normal summon value. You can use Rykos to pop the back row, Card Trooper to play into back row, etc. You got to play all the power spell cards. You got to play Allure. You got to play Burial to recycle your Mizuki and your Plague. Burial has niche applications in the format as well, messing up your opponent's numbers, messing up your opponent's Drill Warrior, that sort of stuff. You got to play Book of Life. Speaking of the devil, you got to mess with your opponent's graveyard. It's a big part of this deck's strengths. A lot of decks don't inherently interact with the graveyard very well. They're often having to play cards like DD Crow or, I don't even know, Soul Release, stuff like that. And yes, we do have those on the sideboard here when you really, really need them. But The strength of this deck is that you get to do that in the main deck in game 1, and it works really well. It helps you put off your opponent's Treeborn Frogs, your opponent's Dandelions, cuts them off of their key resources in the graveyard, and keeps your engine going, keeps your searches coming with Goblin Zombie. You get the idea. For the trap cards, in this list, I've copied the trap card lineup from Xeris. I think his trap card lineup is very good. He's got the Wind Blast, the one Bottomless Trap Hole. In some matchups, Bottomless Trap Hole isn't the best, so you don't always want the second copy. You can usually handle one brick with this deck. Sometimes it's okay to have both, though. I think you might want the second one in the sideboard. This is just a stock list. You want to play the Return. I think Return is the best card in this deck. Oftentimes, you're going to be banishing monsters with Plague Spreader and Mizuki, and sometimes with your Dark Armed, or if your opponent Caiuses you, or something along those lines, you activate a Lure of Darkness or whatever. You could easily have 3 or 4 monsters in your banish zone. That makes it for a really, really powerful soul charge type effect in the late game. You also do like to play Call of the Haunted in this deck. It's chainable for value in a lot of different ways. You got 2 Goblin Zombies, Sangan, and Card Trooper, which give you value off of chained Call of the Haunted to a removal spell. You also get to make full access of Mind Control and Brain Control because you can search a tuner very, very easily in this deck. Either Plague Spreader with Goblin Zombie or Plague or Diva with Sangan. And yeah, you just get to play all the best cards in the format, all the best limited cards. If you look at March 2010 ban list, most of these cards you're seeing right here, if you look at the traps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 out of 8 of the traps limited to 1. Look at the spells, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 out of 11 of the spells limited to 1. Look at the monsters. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You got 8 of the monsters are limited to 1. You get to play all of these insane power cards. A lot of the times it's going to feel like you're stacking your deck because your opening hand is going to have so many limited power cards in it. It's just a great feeling. It's a great feeling to play this deck. In the sideboard, usually you got some way to deal with more graveyard stuff. You could play an extra copy of Book of Life, or you can play these Kaikus. I think Kaiku's really good. It has this hidden ability in protecting your own graveyard from your opponent's graveyard hate. This card has a second line of text that says your opponent cannot banish cards from either graveyard. So you can summon a Kaiku and then go off with things like Book of Life, Mizuki, or you can use it to shut off your opponent's Book of Lives, their Mizuki. You can cut their graveyard off, cut out their Treeborn Frogs, their Lightsworn names, whatever you want to do. I think this is one of the best cards for this deck in particular because it helps protect your graveyard and it helps attack theirs as well. It's a proactive threat. 1800 attack is very good in a lot of matchups against Glads, against Blackwings. Helps you run over key threats. And then, of course, you got 2 DD Crows, 2 Lightning Vortex to deal with Vanity's Fiends, deal with that kind of stuff. 2 Cyber Dragon for the Machine matchup. That matchup's a tricky one. That's a tricky one. Dust Tornado to help you deal with Royal Oppression. That card can really fuck with this deck. 2 Pulling the Rug for Monarchs. Always a trouble matchup. Got to have the 2 Phoenix Wing Wind Blast to help you deal with back row. And this is generally the stock list. I think Darkarm Dragon's a really powerful card. This is one of the best decks at manipulating the graveyard to make sure you have 3 darks in your grave. And I think that's about it, really. I think I covered it pretty straightforward. This is a really strong deck. I think if you're going to get into Edison format and you want to build a deck and you want a first deck, this is one of the best first decks you can build. It teaches you a lot about synchroing. It teaches you a lot about this limited power cards in the format. It gives you a lot of consistency, and you don't really feel bad ever summoning a Goblin Zombie because if it dies, you get to search another monster. I feel like sometimes newer players get discouraged. They summon a monster into back row, gets destroyed. With Goblin Zombie, with stuff like Sangan, Card Trooper, you're never really losing too much, losing a monster to a back row, and the bad feelings, not so much there. Let's go ahead and look at some lists that did well in the past. All right, this is Xeris' list from RBET2. First place player, Xeris, very powerful duelist. It's very similar to the stock list. You'll notice something a little different. He's got the Charge of the Light Brigade and the Lila, as well as 1 Chaos Sorcerer over the Caiuses. He elected to play Charge of the Light Brigade to ideally get some nice mills early on, get his Book of Lives live, maybe hit a Mizuki, maybe get lucky that way. And he elected to play the Lila to help him pop back row and play through things like Royal Oppression. In the sideboard, he has 1 copy of Soul Release over the extra copy of Kaiku, but I pretty much copied his sideboard for the stock list. Most Diva Zombie side decks are going to look pretty similar. You could do a couple different things. We've seen some success with some other cards. I mean, most of what I said for the last list is going to be the same for this list. It's a bunch of limited power cards that go into the zombie deck, and changing too much of it can work, just depends on your configuration and your build. And I think here for him, having the extra Lightsworn and the Chaos Sorcerer worked for him and his build. In my opinion, I think playing 3 Caius, I think playing the Card Trooper, not playing the Charge, I think it's a little bit more consistent, a little bit better. I don't love blind milling when you need the other Deep Sea Diva in deck, stuff like that. Kind of feels a little, to me, personally, I don't love Chaos Sorcerer with only 4 lights. These are a few things that, I mean, personally, as a duelist, I don't really love, but they worked out for him in the tournament, and I think that they're solid picks for the deck if you want to play this deck. Okay, let's go ahead and get into some of the options, because this is where zombies gets real interesting. Options on deck. Look, this deck, you can play almost anything you want. The cool thing about zombies is that it's like an engine. It's like a 9-card, 10-card engine, and you can put whatever you want with it, really. You can combo it with tuners, you can combo it with Lightsworns, you can combo it with heroes. Let's just go ahead and talk about some of these different combinations you can play. The first one, obviously, is Emergency Teleport, plus the 3 premier Psychic Tuners that are legal in the format. Mindmaster is limited to 1, but Krebons and Psychic Commander, you can play any number of them. I think the Emergency Teleport zombie list actually is pretty solid. I think it has a lot of upside. I think it pairs well with certain cards like Instant Fusion. I think it pairs well with certain cards like the Hero Engine, for example, which we'll get into in a second. It's just a nice little way to get a free tuner out of your deck and get your Bryonic combo going. Now, if you're playing this, you're probably not playing the Diva Zombie combo, and that's kind of, or not Diva Zombie, Divas in your deck. You could play both, you could, but it might make you a little heavy on tuners, especially if you have more than 2 of the Psychic Tuners. One of the downsides of the Emergency Teleport package is you have to draw specifically Emergency Teleport, which is limited to 1, to get that free tuner from your deck or hand. If you draw the other half of it, like if you draw Krebons, it is pretty much almost always worse than drawing Diva. Not always worse, but it is generally worse than drawing Diva because it's only 1 tuner. It doesn't give you that extra tuner to go for that big combo play with Diva plus Goblin Zombie. Depending on how your deck is configured, you might want to be able to summon a tuner without having to spend your normal summon. You might want to have that extra bit of speed, and I think the Emergency Teleport builds do well when you can capitalize off of that extra little bit of speed. You can also play the hero stuff in this deck. You can play Rhoda with like Armageddon Knight Stratos as a way to get your grave set up or as a way to search Malicious. Then you can use Zombie Master or Phoenix Wing Windblast or whatever engine card to discard this Malicious Bryonic because you can summon it very easily. And then you can combo that Malicious either with Diva or with Teleport or with Plague, make an easy 8-star Dark End, whatnot. Mystic Tomato is generally pretty good in these builds because Diva plus Malicious in play is a nice little double 8-star combo, provided you summon the Malicious off of the Tomato and you didn't draw the second one. Armageddon Knight can be used as like another way to set up the Malicious in the middle of the late game. It can also send some other cards that you might want to tech into this deck. Maybe cards like Necrogardener, you see down here, maybe cards like the Vayu and the Sirocco stuff. I've seen tech Vayu and Sirocco in zombies, and I don't think it's the worst thing in the world because it gives value to like your Armageddon Knight or your Blind Mills. Randomly, it can also give you a nice little 8-star later in the game with Plague. It's just a little bit difficult to find extra deck space for all of the zombie synchros that you want to play, like Revive King Hot Ace and Doomkaiser Dragon, and then have a full like Armed Wing package. So usually when I see this, it's like a tech like 1/1 line. A few other like more generic stuff you could include like Morphing Jar. I don't love Morphing Jar with Diva. I like it a lot more in the teleport builds. I think it's much better there, but I do think it's very solid. I think Night Assailant is actually really underrated in this deck. It gives you an extra, basically, card when you discard something for cost, which this comes up a lot, mostly with Bryonic. When you're going for these Bryonic pushes, you pitch Night Assailant, and sometimes you only have enough cards to go for the Bryonic play and bounce like 1 of your opponent's cards or 2 of your opponent's cards. This just gives you an extra discard without requiring you to draw another card at any point in time prior to this, and helps your Bryonic pushes be like a lot better. This card also combos really nicely with Phoenix Wing Windblast and with Zombie Master. I think this is a very slept on card in the zombie list, and I'm going to be experimenting with it a lot more. I generally do play it alongside 3 copies of Raikou, sometimes the Morphing Jar. I definitely do play it with some amount of Debris Dragon and Dandelion. I think these cards are actually pretty good in the zombie list. You can do some cool stuff against certain decks. You can Debris into, what's the dragon called? Ancient Fairy Dragon, and you can tutor cards like Zombie World, which are really powerful cards for this deck to have. Zombie World lets your Zombie Masters have a lot more potential, lets your Doomkaiser Dragon have a lot more potential. Zombie World cuts off your opponent's Caiuses, which is a card that actually really fucks with your strategy. It has a lot of utility in this deck. This middle row here is a bunch of light monsters and skill drain and oppression. There's a totally different way you can approach the Diva Zombies deck or the Zombies deck in general. I do want to touch on it in this video just because I think it does fit into that whole like zombies archetype type thing, but it is a very different style of deck. It's like more of a stun strategy, like a light stun strategy that likes to capitalize off of the power of Malevolent Mech Goku N, Paladin of Cursed Dragon, and Honest as a hand trap. You can also use Floodgates like Skill Drain, Royal Oppression, even Rivalry of Warlords. Despite the recent Rivalry of Warlords nerf, it is, still a very powerful, potent combo with Zombie World. And you can use those combos to like the fullest extent, I think, in this light build of it. I've even experimented with Kuraz, Zombie World, and Book of Life. And I think that that's a very powerful combo. You really haven't lived until you've popped a Goblin Zombie with a Kuraz, drawn a card, searched. It's a great feeling for sure. Great feeling for sure. Only a little bit awkward that you can't tribute summon cards like Prime Material and Kuraz while Zombie World's in play because they are not zombie monsters. However, with recent rulings, you can tribute set them while Zombie World is in play. So tribute setting a Prime Material Dragon is actually not that bad. Your opponent's going to have a little bit of trouble getting over it. It's a solid defensive threat. 2K is a strong body. This card is pretty strong. It helps you protect your monsters from effects that may destroy them, like Raikou, Black Rose, that kind of thing. Judgment Dragon even. And yeah, I mean, it's just a solid card, especially when you're backing it up with Honest, stuff that you actually want to discard like Mizuki, whatnot. It's a great card to revive under Zombie World. There's a lot of potential with this sort of like light zombie option deck that I think is very, very underdeveloped in Edison format. I think we could definitely see one of these types of decks do very well at tournaments in the future. One of the other things you could try in this deck is the Lightsworn. Speaking of like light stuff, you could do like a Lightsworn zombie deck. These are a little bit awkward because, I don't know, it's a little bit tough, right? With only one Mizuki as a great mill, and then everything else is like kind of an awkward mill, you're in this weird camp where you're like, you want to play traps to keep yourself alive till you can go for your big push. You want to play a full number of zombies. You want to play the full Lightsworn package with Judgment Dragon, recharges and stuff. It's kind of hard to fit all of that into 40 cards. And once you start going over 40 cards, you start missing out on a lot of the consistency and a lot of the powerful synergies. I also don't love the blind milling with stuff like Deep Sea Diva. I mentioned this earlier in the video. It can be really disruptive to draw 2 divas or to mill a diva because you have this turbo draw power in Solar Recharge. It's just a little awkward. One of the other options for the deck is to play a sort of super turbo dark Illblood package. You can play Future Fusion, reveal Super Alloy Beast. Oh, I gotta write this guy out. Yeah, this guy. I'll add him to the sideboard here. You can reveal this guy for Future Fusion, and you can send 2 Illbloods. Illblood also works really well with Dark Refer, and I think these builds do really well with the Dark Creator as well. You go down minus a lot with the Dark Refer and getting your graveyard stacked, and then the Dark Creator gives you these insane OTK pushes later in the game. I think these types of builds are very underexplored as well. I think they have a lot of potential. There's a really cool build that I remember doing well, like Top the YCS or something back in the 2010 era, that played triple Reckless Greed. And this is kind of what I was talking about with Night Assailant. Oftentimes, you need cards in hand to both go for like your Zombie Master and your Bryonic like pitches. This deck is very discard heavy. And when you do go for those OTKs, then Reckless Greed is not that big of a deal, right? Like the drawback is you do skip your next 2 draw phases. That doesn't matter if you win the game immediately. I think Reckless Greed is very underexplored in the zombie deck. I think it's very good in the zombie deck. I think it does a little bit better when you have the speed of something like Emergency Teleport, Instant Fusion, or Miracle Fusion. I think it's a little bit worse when you're relying on a multi-normal summon combo, like normal summon Goblin Zombie, normal summon Deep Sea Diva. I think it's also a little bit worse with Deep Sea Diva because you have a higher chance of drawing into both of them when utilizing this card. This card is very underused in Edison format as it is right now, but I think this is one of the best decks for it personally because it can give you those extra cards you need to push for an OTK with Bryonic. It can also give you those extra cards to help you just get started. And the lost draw phases, like let's say you do end up skipping a draw phase, they're oftentimes not quite as felt because you do get those extra searches from Goblin Zombie, you get those extra summons from like Mizuki Book of Life. So you're not hurting super badly for card advantage. You are just hurting for that extra card advantage in that one big push turn. You guys will get it. You practice with the deck, you'll get it. A few other things that this deck could play. I like Enemy Controller. I like this card a lot actually with Deep Sea Diva. If you start with Deep Sea Diva Enemy Controller, you can play Diva, sack the extra Diva that you get for Enemy Controller, take their monster, make a Synchro. It turns your Enemy Controller straight up into another copy of Brain Control. I really like it. I've included Spine Gilman up here as an alternate option. I think Spine Gilman is good if you're playing 3 copies of Deep Sea Diva. I think it's actually underutilized in this deck in general because drawn bricks aren't that bad. You can convert them with Zombie Master. You can convert them with Bryonic. So it's never really that bad to draw these bricks. And I do like enemy controller in those types of builds. Enemy controller can also like sack a goblin zombie, get you a search, take a monster, search a plague, and then synchro off with their monster. There's a lot of cool tricks with enemy controller in this deck. I think it's very underutilized. I think this is a cool tech that will probably see a lot more play in zombies in the future. I've also included Gale. That works well with the tomato stuff. Is that everything that I've talked about here? Oh yeah, this bottom row. Let's go ahead and talk about these little fun babies. We got the Doom Kaiser Dragon Assault Mode. I actually think this card is really strong. This card says when it's special summoned, you special summon any number of zombie type monsters from either player's graveyard to your side of the field. So this is a straight up like double graveyard soul charge if you have Zombie World in play. It's a little difficult to get this set up exactly, like not the easiest. You can like ladder into Doom Kaiser Dragon pretty easily if your opponent is playing their own plague. You can do stuff like summon your zombie master, pitch a monster, take their plague, synchro into Doom Kaiser, take their plague again, and then have the assault mode to set up the Doom Kaiser Dragon assault mode, take their stuff. I think this card is really interesting. I think there's a lot of potential with this card in the future. I think King of the Skull Servants, the Lady in the White, the Skull Servant builds are very underdeveloped. I think there is definitely something there. I think there's only 9 copies of these Skull Servant cards legal. I think the other one that's legal is obviously the Vanilla Skull Servant, which I'll add real quick here. But even with 9 copies, like you can get a 4,000, 5,000 King of the Skull Servants pretty easily. And I think that's like a solid beater. It's a solid threat in this type of format, can randomly kill your opponent out of nowhere off a Book of Life or a Zombie Master revival. So I think this is definitely something that's underdeveloped and has a lot of potential in the format. I also think Magical Merchant is a card that works really well in this deck because it mills your monsters, which are the cards you want to mill, and then it draws into your spell cards, which are the cards you want to draw. I think it has a lot of potential. It could even see some play over like the Lightsworn stuff in the deck. You could do a heavier monster build to make sure you mill stuff with maybe like the Tech Vayu Sirocco, maybe the Tech Malicious, whatever you want to do, Dandelion, that sort of thing with the Magical Merchant. I could totally see something like that working out for the zombie deck. And then the last card that I want to talk about that I think works really well in the zombie deck is actually Gold Sarcophagus. There's this really cool play pattern in the format where if you activate Gold Sarcophagus, your opponent has this sort of emotion, right? The emotion is, okay, I need to kill them before this Gold Sarcophagus happens. Every time I activate a Gold Sarcophagus, my opponent immediately is going to start playing more aggressively because they want to put me into a position where the card I get off of the Gold Sarcophagus isn't going to help me, basically. And then one of the perfect cards, I think, to parry aggression in this format is Pyramid Turtle. Pyramid Turtle is like really, really good at stopping attacks, like walling up. And also another card that's really, really good at parrying aggression, of course, is Spirit Reaper. And Zombies plays both of these cards. So with Spirit Reaper and Pyramid Turtle, like on your side of the field, in your arsenal and whatnot, I think Gold Sarcophagus becomes very, very powerful. On top of that, like I mentioned earlier, the deck has a lot of really powerful one-of bombs. You can play Gold Sarcophagus and search for a wide variety of options like Return, Dark-Armed Dragon, Heavy Storm, Burial from the Different Dimension, like you name it. There's a million different things you can search with Gold Sarcophagus that straight up just aren't wrong to search for. And I think Gold Sarcophagus is actually pretty solid in the zombie deck in general, solid tech. Now there's a few techs here in the sideboard that I usually talk about are played sometimes, but I don't think they're very good. I don't think Doom Caliber Knight's very good in this deck. You already have a pretty good time poking against Rykos. I've seen some people try to play Doom Caliber Knight. He is a dark. He does help improve the Gladiator Beast matchup, but that matchup's not that popular to begin with. He doesn't really bring much to the deck. He's normal summon heavy. It's not the best. I've seen some people tech Needle Sealing in the sideboard. I think the issue is once you have a couple monsters in play, you can clear boards pretty easily with Bryonic. So I think Needle Sealing's a little awkward. While yes, it is like an extra copy of Torrential, and we all know Torrential plus Goblin Zombie is very good. One of the strengths of Torrential is it can be activated on the early turns of the game. Needle Sealing's never really live that early, so I don't really love it. I think Beast of the Pharaoh is quite terrible in this deck, mostly because it's such a bad draw. It's a vanilla, and then it requires you to need to successfully Synchro Summon. So if you successfully Synchro Summon with this, through Oppression, through Back Row, through Solemn, whatever, then you get a special summon a level 4 or lower zombie monster from your graveyard. That sort of effect it's very narrow. It's very narrow. This card, oftentimes you're going to draw it and you're just going to be like, fuck. It's not a dark for Allure or Dark Armed. It's not a great mill. It does work well with Debris Dragon, I will say. It does work pretty well with Debris Dragon. But not only do you need to get him in your graveyard, you need to get another zombie in the graveyard to give yourself the full value out of synchroing with him. Now, there's one thing I'm not really sure of. I don't know if you can, if this card is sent to the graveyard for a Synchro summon, you can target one level 4 or lower zombie monster in the graveyard. I think you can special summon him out. So you can do some plays with like Diva, like make 2 level 5s. I think that's how it works, but I don't think this card is worth playing. I think it's quite weak. I think it's like one of these cards that requires you to do a certain thing to get value. And those types of cards in general are, I think, less powerful than just doing the stuff that's like generically very good. That doesn't require very much difficult process to get the value out of it. Deck Devastation Virus is a card I've seen played in zombies. I think it's okay depending on your build, but it's a little difficult. Oftentimes you're sacrificing a Caius. You're sacrificing a large board presence that you've taken a few turns to build up. There's no real like great deck that you want to use this against that you're super happy using it against. I guess maybe like frogs and stuff. It does help you get your Book of Life live, but I don't know. I think it's a little bit slower in the deck. The only exception is if you are playing Diva plus Gilman. That way, one Diva can make Catastor on the first turn, and then I do think actually Deck Devastation Virus becomes quite good in those builds. Because turn 1, you can deck dev people. I think the turn 1 deck dev has a lot more potential on the draw phase, so they don't get a chance to set their Sang in there, whatever, Dandelion or whatever. Yeah, okay, up next, Archfiend Zombie Skull. I don't think this card's very good. It's very difficult to summon. 2+ non-tuner zombies. It's very difficult to get 2+ non-tuner zombies with Plague Spreader Zombie. You need 2 that are like level 2 or 1 that's level 1, level 3. I think those are the only combinations, and that's just like, it's kind of difficult to do outside of like Skull Servant variants or like Zombie World Dandelion variants. It's pretty difficult to meet the requirements for this. If your build can meet the requirements for this, it's not a bad card by any means. It's not a bad card. Makes it so your zombie monsters can't be destroyed by card effects. It's actually pretty solid. Helps you play into back row, helps you play into black rows, you know, that kind of stuff. It also protects, like, let's say you do summon this because you have a zombie world set up. It does protect all of your monsters because now all of your monsters are zombie world. Not zombie world. They're zombie types now. So it has some applications in those types of builds, but you really have to build around this card to fully utilize it. I think including it in the extra deck it's pretty bad unless you have a very specific build that can summon this guy easily. Creature Swap is a card that the more and more I play this format, the less I like this card. Very often, you're not creature swapping for something that's better than one of your own monsters, and very often, you're just going to walk yourself 2-for-1 into a Phoenix Wing Wind Blast, which is a bad feeling. It's a bad feeling. When Creature Swap is good, it's very good, don't get me wrong, but taking your opponent's Shining Angel and giving them a Goblin Zombie is just like, why did I do this? You know what I mean? Why did I do this? You can hug this and wait for the Christia, but then you're just losing to their Shining Angel because you have one dead card that's just like waiting for their late game play, and oftentimes you just get like fucking OTK'd and shit. Or they'll just special Christia, normal and extra monster next to it to protect themselves from creature swap. You get the idea. You get the idea. Next card, Kasha. This card is interesting, but it does cost you 2 monsters in play, that's a huge cost. I don't care what deck you got. That's a big cost. It costs you at least 2 monsters in play. It does shuffle all monsters on the field. Yes, all monsters on the field into the deck, which is a busted effect. Don't get me wrong. That's a busted effect, but it costs 2 of your monsters in play. It's a hard sell. It's a hard sell. Maybe if you're playing a deck with trade-in and this guy just happens to fit in somehow, you can maybe make it work as like a weird like field nuke that comes up occasionally, but is just part of your discard engine. It's awkward that he's not dark. It's awkward that he needs printed types to gain attack. That way he doesn't really combo very well with Zombie World. It's a hard sell. It's a hard sell for me. Scapegoat. Scapegoat's an interesting card. I think it works well with enemy controller. I'll say that. Works well with enemy controller. Works well if it's a pretty aggressive metagame, looking to like bounce your board with Bionic or Giant Trunade or Cold Wave or whatever. Scapegoat helps you protect against a lot of different stuff. I think it's a solid chainable defensive trap, but ultimately there are better things you can be playing like Phoenix Wing Wind Blast and whatnot. I think I've seen this sort of pseudo engine in a couple different builds. I've seen Shoot and Doji, Dialk, and DDR. I think this is a very suboptimal engine. I think it's a little bit worse than just playing Return and the other card, Burial. Those cards, I think, are just better than these. These are a little slow. They're a little clunky. They walk you into your opponent's deck devs. They just make your deck feel a little worse. They're not darks. They're not, like, great tributes for Caius. Yes, they are option selects of Pyramid Turtle, but they're both pretty mediocre draws, realistically. DDR has some interesting potential, but like I mentioned earlier, the deck is already very discard intensive. having your combo setup be a discard on top of your combo needing discards, Bryonic as well, it's just awkward. It's hard to put together. Vampire Lord, this card's kind of awkward. I don't think it's very good. I think its effect is overshadowed by a lot of different cards, namely like Prime Material Dragon, whatever. I think these cards, like straight up, even though it's not a zombie, I think it's just a straight up better card to include in your deck because, you know, it can be drawn and utilized to its fullest effect. I've seen lists play Pot of Avarice and Fiendish Chain. I think both these cards are very bad. Yes, you can recycle Fiendish Chain with Bryonic, but it's not free. You do have to discard a card to do that. So you're using Fiendish Chain to not fully out a monster, still leave them with Tribute Fodder for their Kaius, still leave them with the Synchro Material monster. I can't recommend this card. I like, in good faith, I think this card is very bad in Edison format. I think it's even worse in this deck because it's not hard removal. I'd rather just have Phoenix Wing Wind Blast basically in every single situation that I have Fiendish Chain. And then also the Pot of Avarice, you shuffle back your graveyard, then you turn off your graveyard synergies. It's a little awkward. Yes, there is a hidden strength with Pot of Avarice. You can put back your Bryonic and Yugioh, and you can go for further pushes with that. But oftentimes your push is getting stopped by Bottomless Trap Hole and not by anything else. And Bottomless Trap Hole will banish those cards anyway. So basically what I'm saying is Pot of Avarice is not a great inclusion in this deck. You can play it, not my favorite. Those are some of the options you can play in the zombie deck. I think... Oh yeah, let's talk about this last one in the extra deck. Reaper on the Nightmare. Yeah, Reaper on the Nightmare with Instant Fusion is actually really good. I think that sort of stuff is cool. You can utilize that synergy. Instant Fusion does fusion summon so that you can reuse this Reaper on the Nightmare later on, and this card is really, really good. This card attacks your opponent directly for free. Like, you can do it through monsters, you can do it through a dupe block, whatever. When it attacks directly, it discards a card from your opponent's hand. This is a really solid card. Can't be destroyed by battle. Very difficult to deal with. As a reusable option, it is a little awkward. It can't be revived by Zombie Master, but it still can be revived by Book of Life and Mizuki and whatnot. I think this is a very solid Instant Fusion target, and most decks who want to play Instant Fusion don't actually have a good target for it, and that kind of makes Instant Fusion less appealing, because Instant Fusion is already this card that so many people have been recommending it, and it's just like, it takes up extra deck space, A. B, it costs life points. C, it's a -1 in every situation, unless you can convert off of it in some crazy way, like Musician King into Arcanite and some like corner case stuff. And then D, it's like you can only use once per turn. So like you only really want to include one or two of these because they do clog in multiples. But I think in zombies specifically, because you have this really powerful like engine card that you can bring out with Instant Fusion, it's actually a solid choice for zombies. So I think that sort of upside is something that makes me want to include it. All right, these are some of the options. I'm sure there's a million more that I'm forgetting because zombies is just one of those decks where you can play everything. And as long as it fits with your sort of strategy, as long as it fits with your sort of build, what your build's trying to accomplish, it might not be wrong. It might not be wrong. Even some of these cards down here that I'm like creature swap, that card's mid. You could have a build that really takes advantage of creature swap with like Asura Priest and like Chaos Sorcerer and Scapegoat and whatnot. Like you could make a build with Kasha that could do something. But these are just options that I would say don't go into as many builds as the stuff up here in this sort of portion. All right, let's go ahead and get into some of the weaknesses of the deck. The deck's weaknesses. These up here are some of the more generic ones. These down here are some of the more play-based ones. And in the extra deck, these are some of the extra deck weaknesses. I think the obvious generic answers to this deck are DD Crow, Thunder King, Kaiku. These are the big three ones. Kaiku shuts off, obviously, your opponent's Mizukis. Obviously, your opponent's that kind of stuff. Dark Arm Dragon, activations. This card makes it very difficult for your opponent to do shit. You can just attack them, clear their graveyard constantly. It's a really, really solid floodgate against this deck. Thunder King Ryo stops the Goblin Zombie searches, the Sangan searches. You do just got to be careful with Thunder King Ryo if they are playing Card Trooper. Card Trooper can crash with this at a really, really downside value. Just be careful of these types of things when siding these types of cards against zombies. And then, of course, Royal Oppression. Zombies is ultimately a Synchro combo deck, or this build is ultimately a Synchro combo deck. And Royal Oppression... Where was I going with this? Yeah, it stops Synchro Summons. Yeah, it stops it before the Bryonic can activate the effect. Stops it before they can get any sort of value out of things. Stops their Dark End, their Stardust Dragon, their whatever they're going to summon. Speaking of dark monsters, Shadow Imprisoning Mirror, super huge against this deck. Stops Kaya, stops Goblin Zombie, stops Dad, stops Zombie Master. It doesn't actually remove the monsters, so you need a pretty aggressive board presence to make full advantage of Shadow Imprisoning Mirror. And you do have to be not playing any dark monsters yourself to fully utilize this card, but if you can, not play any dark monsters in your deck, and you have the ability to play Shadow Imprisoning Mirror to help improve your zombie matchup, I think you should. It's a very good floodgate against this deck in particular. Some more archetypal things that are good against zombies. Ancient Gear Beast and Machina Fortress are very, very good against zombies. Machina Fortress because if it gets attacked by yugioh Guardian, which is one of the cards the deck likes to make, it gets to pop a card in play, which is devastating. And then if they bring it back, you can run it over and then pop another one of their cards. It's just a great way to parry their main aggressive push. And then if they go for Bionic and try to bounce it, then you get to look at their hand and discard another card from their hand. So it's basically cost them 2 cards to bounce this with Bionic. Takes their best card and their worst card. And then on top of that, it's hard for them to run over with yugioh Guardian. I think this is a very good card against the deck. Ancient Gear Beast, also very good against the deck. Runs over Pyramid Turtle, negate the effect. Runs over Goblin Zombie, Sang, and Card Trooper. All those cards just negate the effect. Runs over whatever it needs to run over and just helps you press through the opening while keeping up a very serious advantage, very serious aggression. These 2 cards are very good out of the machine deck against zombies. Zombie Master. This is a card that you could actually tech in a lot of different decks just to side in against zombies. You can pitch any monster, especially summon a level 4 or lower zombie from either graveyard. So if your opponent has a Plague or a Mizuki or whatever in their graveyard, you can summon Zombie Master, pitch something maybe you want in the grave, like a Treeborn or a Dandelion or something, take their monster, you get 2 summons, you get your grave set up, and it's big pressure against the zombie deck, and all of a sudden they don't have the graveyard to work with. I think this is a cool card to side specifically in the zombie mirrors, specifically, not just in the zombie mirrors, but against zombies out of other decks like Lightsworn. I think can side a copy of this card because they play Plague themselves. I think there's a couple different decks that could probably side this for the zombie matchup to help improve their chances there. Book of Life is a card that obviously is very good in the mirror match. This card you can't side as effectively as you can with Zombie Master, but if you are playing zombies, you can side like a 3rd copy of Book of Life to help with the mirror match. Fairies obviously have Christia, which is a big threat against the zombie deck. I think it's very, very difficult to deal with this if the fairy player has played correctly and baited out all the resources and whatnot. And the dragon deck has Kwakimaru Drago, which is just a huge, huge force against the zombie deck in general. Now keep in mind, if your opponent is able to put together Diva Goblin Zombie, this Drago doesn't stop them from going into Bryonic. It also doesn't stop them from going into Bryonic off like Plague Goblin Zombie, but they have to be in a position where the Goblin Zombie's already in play, you have the Drago in play, and they have the ability to normal summon another monster. Which is, it's kind of difficult to get 2 normal summons against a Drago when it's attacking you every turn, running over whatever you have in play. Even if you have like Pyramid Turtle, your Pyramid Turtle can't go into Goblin Zombie because the Drago the Drago prevents you from special summoning Goblin Zombie. So it's very difficult to get to a position where you can set up Diva plus Goblin Zombie with Drago in play. So I think this card's very good against zombies. Necro Valley, naturally very, very good against zombies. It's different in 2010, I think. It's worse. It doesn't stop non-targeted effects. It doesn't stop monsters that come out of the graveyard of their own effects unless they target. It doesn't stop a lot of like random shit, but it does shut off Book of Life, Zombie Master, Mizuki, the big 3. It stops Dark Arm Dragon from banishing things to pop. It stops, just a few different cards. It doesn't stop Plague Spreader Zombie from coming back off its own effect, but usually you can just have something for that and then have the Necro Valley to shut off the Mizuki and be chilling. Ready Ari, if you're playing the Gladiator Beast deck, Ready Ari can be a pain in the ass for this deck. And naturally, these last three cards make it so it's just impossible to combo as the zombie player because your monsters need to hit the grave. You need your graveyard in order to do stuff with this deck. Dimensional Fissure and Macrocosmos make it so Bryonic can't activate. Dimensional Fissure, Bryonic can still activate as long as it's pitching a spell or trap. But Macrocosmos, Bryonic can't activate because it needs to send to the graveyard for cost. These cards help shut off the Bryonic OTKs. Banisher of the Radiance does as well to some degree. And yeah, I mean, it's very difficult for the zombie deck to deal with these types of cards. They have to spend the removal on it. So if you have a strategy where you're like, I have multiple threats that demand removal, and my banishing cards shut off your entire engine, it should be a very easy time against zombies. So if you're having trouble with zombies, you want to, fuck them up, maybe try out these 3 cards. I think they're some of the best cards you play against zombies. In the sideboard, I've got some other options, which I think some of them are bad, some of them are like, okay. Doom Caliber Knight, I think this card is okay against zombies. It's a little awkward. It can give you so here's my issue, right? Here's my issue. Positionally, your opponent sets a Goblin Zombie, right? And then they pass. You summon your Doom Caliber Knight. You attack the Goblin Zombie. They both die. You trade it. Now you're behind a normal summon because your opponent gets the initiative, and now your opponent's Book of Life is immediately live. That's my issue with Doom Caliber Knight in the matchup. However, I do think if your deck is doing something like Dimensional Fissure plus Macrocosmos, Doom Caliber Knight all of a sudden is very good because the only effects that really activate, I mean, Goblin Zombie's not even going to activate to trigger your Doom Caliber Knight. Pyramid Turtle's not even going to activate, that kind of stuff. The only effects that really activate are Raikou and Caius, and those are the cards you need to stop to protect your D-Fissure and your Macrocosmos. So I think Doom Caliber Knight does have a place against zombies. It just depends on what you're pairing it with. Obviously, it's not going to be great with like Shadow Imprisoning Mirror, but it is going to be great with these banished cards in particular. I think Fossil Dyna is quite bad against zombies unless you have like an insane amount of trap cards. And even then, it's like awkward. Your opponent will summon a Pyramid Turtle and it's like gets under Bottomless. They'll attack your dude. They could even just set the Pyramid Turtle. You can't get over it with Dyna. It's awkward. It's awkward. I don't think Dyna's that good. You normally, against decks that like special summon a lot, you could set Dyna to try and wipe their board. Against zombies, you can't really do that because they'll just go into Bryonic and they'll bounce your Fossil Dyna. So it's not the best. It's not the best. Unlike cards like Vanity's Fiend, I think Vanity's Fiend is a little bit better against zombies, but you do have to find the tribute for it. So it's a little bit awkward if they're citing Zombie World, Vanity's Fiend's a dead card. If they're citing Book of Life, your Treeborn Frogs aren't safe. You got to find a way to get these monsters into play consistently in order for them to be good enough to side in against this deck. And if your strategy can do that, then that's good. These two cards here, Nobleman of Crossout and Aaron, these are cards that can very easily be played around from the zombie player. All of a sudden, they see one of these cards, they just start summoning everything. They take a few under life points here and there, but they're never losing their effects due to an Aaron or knock. So I think these cards are better when they're not known about or not expected. If they are expected, the opponent will just play around it and know exactly what you're up to, and they become very weak cards in the matchup, as opposed to something that, if you're shuffling back a Pyramid Turtle with Aaron, or you're banishing a Goblin Zombie with knock, like, these are obviously very powerful effects. They can cut your opponent's limbs, they can cut off their opening, that sort of thing. And yeah, same thing for the Monarchs as Vanity's Fiend. If you can find a way to get the tributes off, they're obviously very good, but Zombies does a very good job at making sure you don't have tributes. These two cards here, Battle Fader, Threatening Roar, I think these cards are very good against zombies because, like I mentioned multiple times before, they only have one chance to go for a push, really. They only have one chance to go for Bryonic Goyo Guardian. But I do think that these cards are only good if you can come back after they go for the push. Some decks don't really have that sort of comeback potential. Some decks are playing slower cards like Raikou, Hamster, Gravekeeper Spy, that kind of stuff. I think in those instances, Battle Fader and Threatening Roar are quite bad because what are you going to do? Battle Fader their Bryonic Goyo and then like set a Raikou? They'll just Bryonic bounce it and kill you the next turn. So I think these are only good cards when maybe you have like Machina Fortress or just like Judgment Dragon or a way to come back from an OTK push. Cutting off their one OTK push with the Bryonic and the Goyo can leave the zombie player with low resources, with not enough gasoline to go for another push. So I think these cards have a lot of potential if your deck can come back, basically. And then, of course, Deck Devastation Virus. This is the bane of all Synchro monster decks. You can use it in the draw phase. It's pretty good against zombies on the play. If you can't use it in the draw phase, it becomes a lot worse. Also, one thing about zombies is they do really enjoy being in the grave. Similar to Doom Caliber Knight, Deck Devastation Virus, if you hit a Goblin Zombie, you're automatically making their Book of Life live. You're tributing a monster, putting a monster in the grave. Now all of a sudden their Book of Lives are live, and they can sort of go off. If that Goblin Zombie was in play, they can just search for another card. So this card, it's only really good if you can do it turn one on the play. Otherwise, it's pretty bad. So yeah, that's kind of my assessment on these strategies. I think these are all really good cards against zombies up here, and I think these are cards that are sometimes good against zombies, but you gotta be able to initiate the positions. As far as the extra deck monsters, I think Revive King Hades, if you're playing Plague Spreader and like Tech Zombie Masters and stuff, this card's very good for the same reason that Ancient Gearbeast is very good against zombies. Doom Kaiser Dragon, obviously very good against zombies. You take their Plague, you take their Mizuki, all of a sudden they have nothing to work with on their turn. As long as you protect that, set a Battle Trap or whatever, you can cut them off of their key resources that initiate their combos. And then I think Absolute Zero is actually one of the best cards against zombies because they can't go for OTK pushes without Bryonic bouncing stuff. They go Bryonic, they bounce your Absolute Zero, and then they lose their whole board. So I think this card is very good against zombies in general too. Zombie players definitely need to figure out a way to deal with Absolute Zero, either in their main or their side, because this card is just a problem for them. It's very difficult to push through. Usually you want to Raikou pop this. Usually you want to even Puppet Plant take it's not bad. Oh, maybe I should start citing Puppet Plant. Another thing you could do, I forgot this in the options portion. You know what? I'm I'm gonna add this real quick to the options. We're gonna do this retroactively. I think this card, Marionette Might. Let's talk about this a little bit. This card is good. This card's straight up good. Without Zombie World in play, it can take Caius, which is, you know, already pretty solid. Most decks play Caius. But with Zombie World in play, it can take anything. It's a straight up brain control. And you can tutor it with Sangan, which is sick. It's a dark monster, so like worst case scenario, you can pitch it to a lure. And yeah, it's also pretty cool with creature swap. You can creature swap them a zombie and then take it back with Marionette Might. Do stuff like that. There's a lot of cool little tricks with this card. Very underrated card. Very, very underrated card. And I think that's one of the ways that moving forward, the zombie decks can deal with absolute zero. So yeah, fun stuff. Anyway, this is the zombie guide. If you like this sort of thing, if you like these guides, of course, they take a lot more effort and time, I think, than the other videos do, the normal duel videos, but they really help out with the newer players. If you're a newer player, make sure you're subscribed. You know, leave a like, leave a comment, basically is what I'm saying. I really like reading your guys' comments. They're always really cool, really nice. E3 Yu-Gi-Oh! Signing off, guys. See you in the next video. Peace.